Can a seemingly perfect car completely destroy the confidence of a 7-time world champion? What really happened with the SF25 in Qatar for Lewis Hamilton to be eliminated in Q1 and SQ1 consecutively, something that had not happened to him since 2009? Subscribe to continue uploading more of this type of content now, if we continue. In the sprint classification, hours later, the story was the same, but amplified. The team attempted to make up for the stability deficit with a more aggressive downforce configuration, increasing the angle of the rear wing to gain support. But this had a devastating side effect. It reduced straightaway speed, making it even more difficult to execute a clean lap. At a circuit like Lusail, where time is gained in high-speed corners with surgical precision, Hamilton was racing with a blindfold and extra weight in his backpack. The combination of an unpredictable car, a faulty setup, and a technical environment unable to provide clear answers left Hamilton completely exposed. And that's the most alarming thing. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a bad day. It was a systemic collapse. When a driver of Lewis Hamilton's stature is eliminated in Q1 for 2 consecutive weekends, the explanation cannot be limited to the surface. Ferrari engineers knew that what happened in Qatar was not a simple case of bad luck. It was necessary to unravel the reason for a car that seemed correct in the numbers, but was unmanageable on the track. Thus began one of the most delicate technical investigations in recent years in Maranello. The key to everything was what the engineers defined as a hidden correlation failure. During the previous sessions, the simulation and wind tunnel data did not show any serious inconsistencies. The SF25 on paper should have been competitive at Lusail. However, once on the track, the unthinkable occurred, an aerodynamic failure that left no trace in conventional telemetry. It was as if the car briefly collapsed on each fast corner and then started running normally again. It was then that internal investigations detected a critical physical disconnection, almost imperceptible to the naked eye. The connection between the flat bottom of the car and the rear suspension system presented a millimeter deviation, caused by a structural incompatibility between the new plank materials and the pull rod support. This small mismatch, under normal conditions, would have been tolerable. But on a circuit like Lusail, where high-load corners follow one another without a break, this defect became a time bomb. When the car faced maximum lateral forces, this unequal flex between the ground and the suspension activated a loss of aerodynamic suction phenomenon. That is, the rear suddenly stopped generating load, causing the car to lose grip without warning. For a driver, this is hell. You are inside a fast corner at more than 250 kilometers per hour, and suddenly the car stops sticking to the ground. You can't predict it, you can't correct it, much less trust the next lap. And this is where the technical drama becomes a human drama. Because when a car starts to behave like this, not even the best driver in the world can save it. Trust evaporates. Hamilton went from looking for the limit to simply surviving on the track. His driving style, so dependent on a stable rear axle, was completely nullified. Every curve became a latent threat, and every attempt at adjustment was like putting a band-aid on an open fractured to make the situation even worse. The team decided to increase the downforce of the rear wing in Friday's sprint qualifying, a decision that, in theory, should help stabilize the car. But this modification only aggravated the symptoms. The increase in drag left it without top speed in a straight line, and the disconnection in curves was still present. The strategy, instead of being a solution, became a condemnation. Hamilton was trapped in a car without balance, without traction, and without answers. These types of structural failures are not common in modern Formula One. That they occur at this level, in a team like Ferrari, speaks of a profound disconnection between simulation and reality. And that is the biggest concern. If the failure cannot be predicted, it cannot be prevented. The case of Qatar has become a warning symbol for the entire grid. Because it wasn't just a technical error. It was confirmation that Ferrari still does not have the interaction between the different critical elements of its car under control. And when this lack of control affects one of the most demanding and sensitive pilots in history, the consequences soon become devastating. When any driver falls in qualifying, the error is analyzed, the car is corrected, and we move on. But when the one who falls is Lewis Hamilton, in his debut with Ferrari, and he does it twice in a row in Q1, the impact transcends the limits of the technical. This wasn't just a bad weekend. It was an emotional fracture, a red flag for all of Maranello, and a shock for Formula One. Because what was at stake was not just points. It was credibility, reputation, and the real possibility that this Ferrari-Hamilton alliance, which was born with promises of redemption and legacy, will begin to falter before being consolidated. For Hamilton, this kind of public failure is not common. For more than a decade, he has been the face of excellence, of absolute control under pressure, of technical resilience. Qatar, however, tore that mask off with violence. The body language said it all. He was not a frustrated pilot, he was a disconnected pilot. His gaze was not looking for excuses, it was looking for understanding. And that type of silence for a competitor at his level is more devastating than any scream. Internally, the impact was also seismic. Ferrari had bet everything on Hamilton. His signing was not simply a sporting addition, it was a strategic statement, a way of telling the world that they were ready to win again. But after the collapse in Qatar, the narrative changed. The Italian press was relentless, the sponsors made uncomfortable calls, and within the team there began to be talk, for the first time, that perhaps the integration between driver and car was not being as fluid as it seemed. And this is where the most dangerous variable comes in, the loss of mutual trust. In Formula One, the relationship between a driver and his technical team must be almost telepathic. When the pilot doubts the data, and the team cannot explain what he is feeling, the bond is eroded. What happened in Qatar left scars that are difficult to heal. Hamilton openly stated that he could not drive a car that reacted randomly in a corner. And that phrase, so direct, put in check the engineers who had built the SF-25 with the idea that it was a predictable and stable car. Strategically, Ferrari faced an immediate dilemma. Should they double down and rebuild the rear of the car in the middle of the season, risking all the accumulated development? Or should they make smaller adjustments and trust that the fix would come with future updates? Neither option was ideal, because in the meantime, the calendar advances, the rivals add points, and mistakes begin to cost more than the team can afford. In parallel, the biggest collateral effect was the additional pressure on Charles Leclerc. Although he also suffered in Qatar, he managed to qualify better and save some of Ferrari's honor. This created additional tension within the garage, because if the car was so unpredictable, why was Leclerc able to handle it better? The direct comparison between colleagues began to gain weight in the media, and even more dangerous, within the internal structure. At Ferrari, where historical tensions between drivers have been a chronic cancer, the slightest difference can become a deep rift. What happened in Qatar, therefore, is not limited to a technical error. It was a total stress test for the new era of Ferrari. And for now, the results of that test are worrying. The image of a frustrated Hamilton, eliminated in Q1, staring blankly in the garage while mechanics dismantle the car in search of an explanation, has become a symbolic photograph of the risk of betting everything on the short term without first guaranteeing the fundamentals. Because in modern Formula One, having the talent is not enough. It's not enough to have the budget, and it's not even enough to have the best pilot. If there is no harmony between man, machine, and environment, any empire can collapse in a single Saturday. What happened in Qatar was not an isolated anecdote or a simple setback. It was a seismic event with aftershocks that are already being felt throughout the season. Because when a piece as central as Hamilton suffers such an abrupt fall, the entire competitive and media structure that revolves around it goes into crisis. And the most alarming thing is that this fracture does not have an immediate solution. Furthermore, in a calendar as extensive and demanding as 2025, where the Grand Prix follow one another without pause, the capacity for technical and strategic reaction is as important as speed on the track. And this is where Ferrari faces its biggest challenge, managing to rebuild trust, reconfigure a car with invisible flaws, and at the same time remain competitive against structures that today are more stable, faster, and above all, more predictable. But perhaps the most complicated of all this is the narrative that is being built off the track. Because Formula One is not just a sport, it is also a continuous story. A story where perception weighs as much as results. And today, the dominant perception is that Ferrari has failed in its attempt to be reborn with Hamilton as its banner. That judgment, still premature, is already beginning to influence the way the media, fans, and rivals themselves observe the team. In a championship as tight as this one, where the differences between glory and failure are measured in tenths of a second, and in decisions made under pressure, what happened in Qatar could mark a before and after. Not because of the points lost, but because of the type of questions it has generated. Uncomfortable questions. Questions that reveal cracks. And in Formula One, when you start asking too many questions, it's because the answers don't come. Ferrari needs to react. Hamilton needs to regain control. And both urgently need to prove that Qatar was just a momentary nightmare, not a harbinger of the rest of the season. Because if not, 2025 could go from being the year of red hope to the year of definitive disenchantment. Subscribe to continue uploading more of that content. Now you really think about all this.